Welcome to our community on the Light 95.9. Our guest today is Dean Kaler. Dean has a very interesting story, but I want to label this interview and story as forgiveness. And 50 years ago today, a tragic at Kent State University, the shootings. Dean was there. He was just 20 years old, a first quarter freshman. He decided to attend his first protest rally on May 4th. Dean, I can't imagine. Can you enlighten us, please, at what was it like when you were there that day?
Well, the morning was pretty much normal, but when I went to the rally around noontime, things were a little bit different. There were several thousand students on the Commons. There were many National Guard around, all with their rifles and bayonets affixed and with helmets on. So that was the most unusual part of the day. The whole day, I saw people like that all around, but they didn't bother us while we were attending classes along the way. But when I got there, I was a little disappointed in the rally or the protest because there was just one or two people using a bullhorn talking about the isms of the day. And not much was going on. I was thinking, what does this have to do with our troops who are in Vietnam and our troops who are now invading another country and expanding the war in Vietnam after Richard Nixon had made his speech on April the 30th. And so I was getting bored. I was nearly tempted to leave until the Jeep rolled out into the major part of the Commons and made an announcement that we were gathered illegally on our own campus in a very normal gathering place right near the student union. And of course, this did not endear the National Guard and the campus security man who was riding with them to the students. And at that point in time, students started throwing stones at the National Guard who were in the Jeep. And of course, they were staying far enough away that unless you were a center fielder for the Cleveland Indians or the Kansas City Royals, you had no chance of really hitting them. And so they went back to their area where they were gathered, the National Guard troops, by the ROTC building that has been burned down. And a few minutes later, they came out and read the Ohio Riot Act to the students. And, of course, it generated the same response. And then they went back to their position over near the student union. And at that point in time, I saw them adjusting their gas masks, adjusting their helmets, fiddling with their bayonets, checking their M1 rifles, M1 Garand rifles, all that sort of stuff. And then I saw them form up in a formation. And then they started shooting tear gas at students, then marching on towards the students who were a couple hundred yards away at that point in time.
I can't imagine. I can't imagine what it was like. I have no idea. Then the shooting. When did you had the tear gas, but what happened? What triggered the shooting?
Well, that's the million-dollar question at this point in time. We don't know what triggered the shooting. The students were staying a respectful distance away. Some students were throwing stones in the direction of the National Guard. I don't know that many of them actually hit the National Guardsmen. I know I was over 100 yards away almost all the time whenever they were marching around chasing groups of students here and there and everywhere. And I remember at one point in time going up the hill beside Taylor Hall, down the other side of Taylor Hall Hill, through the parking lot and across Midway Drive and into a gravel parking lot, which was used as a storage place for the construction materials that were used to build the new student union, or the student center as it's called, and the new library at that point in time. And that's when I huddled behind a pile of gravel, washed my face with a wash rag that I had carried in a baggie in my pocket, and got the tear gas out of my face and eyes and nose and my ears, and started to feel almost normal at that point in time. And I remember at that point in time, I stood up, grabbed a handful of gravel, and threw it in the direction of the National Guard, underhand. I didn't even try throwing it hard. I mean, it was just out of pure frustration. that I did that. I actually hit some students who were standing in front of me about 20 yards away, and they turned around and gave me the devil at that point in time. And then at that point in time, I looked up and I saw the National Guard in a kneeling position on the practice football field, pointing their weapons at students who were in the parking lot amongst the cars. So I'm not sure what that was all about. And then I saw them stand up and huddle together. And then they formed up again and started marching back from where they had come, back towards the top of the hill, Taylor Hall. Mind you, now they were in a fenced-off practice football field that had a fence on three sides, and students had now formed a fourth fence on the one side, and the National Guard marched right through them. I mean, they were in close contact with students as students scattered to get out of the way, and there was no threat to the National Guard at that point in time. And they kept on marching up the hill. And when they reached the top of the hill, there were no students in front of them. The only students that were really close to them were the students who were on the veranda of Taylor Hall. There were a couple hundred students right next to them, within arm's reach almost. And nothing was going on. And all of a sudden, they turned in unison, raised their rifles to their shoulders, and at this point in time, I said to myself, oh my God, they're going to shoot. And I had no place to hide behind, so I dove on the ground. And the next thing I know, gunshots erupted. And then as I was on the ground there, I heard bullets hitting the ground around me. And I'm wondering, why are they shooting at me? I'm nearly 100 yards away from these people. I have no idea what's going on. And then I got hit. And I thought, oh my God. And I said a little prayer, and next thing I know, I'm thinking, and the bullets are still hitting the ground around me. And then I realized that I could get shot again. And at that point in time, the bullets then stopped. Of course, all the chaos and the screaming and hollering that was going on during the shooting stopped as well for a few seconds. And then the chaos and screaming and the fright and terror was reigniting. And students were getting up and seeing the aftermath of the shooting, with 13 students laying on the ground, wounded at this point in time. And it took forever. It took almost 20 minutes before the ambulance got to me. In the meantime, there was a group of students who were gathered around me. And almost immediately after the shootings, to go back a few seconds, a student ran over to me on the ground with his briefcase, looked me he crawled on the ground, he looked me in the eye, and he said, do you know your parents' phone number? And so I can call them and tell them what happened. And so I gave him both my parents' work telephone numbers. And he went into Prentice Hall and called my parents. They did not have to hear about it on the news. They were informed by a wonderful student who took the time to spend his own cash money at a payphone to call my parents. I'm forever indebted to him for that.
What an amazing story, Dean. There you are lying on the ground, and I'm sure I can't believe the pandemonium was going crazy. I mean, everybody screaming. And what happened? Were the guards still standing there? Did they walk away, or what? You probably couldn't see where you're lying on the ground.
Well, I couldn't see them, no. But they could see. I mean, I could see if I wanted to. I was looking there, but there was enough students around me talking to me that I really was paying no attention to the National Guard. I was told that the National Guard stood there for about 5 or 10 minutes before some student, I was told, ran down to where the National Guard had come from and let them know that there was a shooting up there and there were wounded students on the ground. And then they finally started sending ambulances in our direction at that point in time. So, yeah, it was crazy. The students, I remember looking at the students' faces, and the fright and the terror that was on their eyes was just unbelievable.
I'm sure.
What they had witnessed, and now we're witnessing with everybody around them. So.
Well, prior to that, as you were going on campus, this was your, as a first quarter freshman,
Yeah.
decided. When did you hear? What were there? Papers or posters up about the rally? Come and be involved in the rally.
Yeah, there was this rally. Basically, it was planned sometime the week before. I knew about it, and I'm sure it was probably planned something like Thursday night into Friday morning. And I'd seen posters around campus on Friday, and when I got back home or got back to campus, I went home for the weekend, and when I got back to campus, there were posters everywhere. So I knew that it was going on, and I thought, well, they keep talking about there being martial law, but there wasn't martial law. There was no fully declared martial law that we knew about as students, and there was no ban on rallies that we knew. There was no official ban on it. The one thing I must stress here is that the president of the university, I think, acted like Pontius Pilate and washed his hands of the whole incident once Governor Rhodes came in and made that inflammatory speech on early Sunday afternoon or late Sunday morning. And he was non-existent. So we had no leadership. We had no protection from our president. We had no one who was going to stand up to speak for the students at that point in time. So it was real tough. It was real tough. There was no guidance. We had to transition between the old student body president and the new student body president, and they were giving conflicting statements about what was going on. So we were a rudderless ship at this point in time.
Well, our guest today is Dean Kaler. We're talking about the 50th anniversary of the Kent State shootings. And Dean, when you were shot, were there other people shot too? I know. I mean, some were dead. Were there other people wounded?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There were 9 of us that were. I was one of 9, and from various wounds. I mean, I think I was probably the most seriously wounded. One person was shot in the wrist, another person was shot in the foot, another person was shot in the neck, but it came out his cheek. It did very little damage. He has some olfactory damage and some case bud damage and some nerve damage in his face and in his mouth. Various other minor wounds along the way.
So you were laying there how long before the ambulance came? So was somebody? I'm sure somebody that was there with you.
Oh yeah, there was a crowd of students there with me.
Okay.
In fact, you can actually see the crowd of students if you look at the wide shot of the Mary Vecchio picture of her kneeling over Jeffrey Miller.
Oh,
one
yes.
that everybody sees.
I remember that. Yeah.
Everybody sees the close shot, but there's a wide shot, and in the background you see students gathered around somebody, and that's where I was located, in that area. So yes, there, like I said earlier, that there were a group of students around me, with the look of terror on their face and shock. I was basically speechless at this point in time.
Can't imagine.
I was trying to control my breathing and to control my nerves, because I knew the worst thing that could happen to me was me getting freaked out and being frightened and didn't want to do anything to cause any real shock, because I knew I was alive and alert and well at this point in time. The gunshot wound felt like a bee sting, but I knew that I had spinal cord damage to my vertebrae or to my body, because the week before in zoology class we pith a frog. That's where you run a probe down the vertebrae of a frog, and the frog's legs get real tight and then they relax. And that's the feeling I felt the second that I got shot.
Wow.
My legs got real tight and then they relaxed. So I knew I had a spinal cord injury at that point in time.
That's great. We're going to be right back with more with Dean in just a moment. Welcome back to our community. And today we're talking with Dean Kaler. We're talking about the 50th anniversary of the Kent State shooting. All right, Dean, you're laying there. And talk about recovery. I mean, I can't imagine the rehab you went through. And if you can talk about that.
Sure. they took me to Robinson Memorial Hospital, and while I was there, I was I was lying on the gurney, and someone came and hollered, "Get blood types on all these people." And I remembered, I've got my wallet and I've got my nurse card because I'd been a blood donor here in Canton whenever I was a kid in high school. And I'd also donated at Kent that first quarter that I was there. And I knew they were going to need my ID and my insurance card and all that sort of stuff. So I got all that out and raised my arm up in the air and said, "Here." And the nurse came by and said, "Oh, thank you, thank you, thank you." She ran off. And a few seconds later, I was being wheeled into a prep room for surgery. And all of a sudden, who walks in but the equivalent of the bishop in our church, our district secretary at that time, Gordon Booker, and from the Church of the Brethren. My mother had the presence of mind to call him and talk to him. She knew his number very well because his son and me were very close friends through church. And we spent a lot of time together, even when we were not in church. We didn't go to the same church, but we were close enough. He lived in Hartville. I lived in Osnaburg Township in East Canton. Few-minute drive, not a problem. And so she had the presence to call him. And luckily, he said, "I was just putting my coat on to go to Robinson Memorial Hospital to visit patients, and I will see him." So he drove, and, they were getting me ready. He walked in, and we had a chance to have a prayer and some discussion. And he says, "I'll see you when you wake up." I said, "I don't know when that'll be." He says, "I don't either, but we'll find out. I'll see you then." So it was very nice to have Gordon there to say a prayer with me and to reassure me that either way things will be okay. And I'm very thankful for that.
Well, you are wheelchair bound since the shooting, and then the Lord just gave you forgiveness. That's the only thing I can think of. So how did this all transpire? I mean, I'm sure that it's a great story. I'd like to hear the forgiveness, which is really hard to do, if you can talk about that.
It really is, but in my case, it really wasn't. It was something that I grew up with. I grew up in the Church of the Brethren, a traditional peace church, also a church that believes in love, forgiveness, understanding, and trying to live a very simple life as well too. And so, I really didn't think twice about forgiving the National Guardsman who pulled the trigger and shot me and other students. It was just a normal part of my life that forgiveness is normal and forgiveness is hard, but you pray over it and you have to forgive yourself first so that you can forgive others. And I've struggled with it from time to time when certain pieces of information come out that dealt with the behavior of the National Guardsmen that weekend and during the shootings. It's not a miraculous story. It was something that, like I said, I grew up with. My family had to deal with it. They had to come to grips with it and make peace with it. And the thing about hate is that it will eat you alive. And the thing about forgiveness, it will give you peace and confidence and a feeling of love as well, because you're in the embrace of Jesus and God, and that you can move forward with your life at that point in time. And I was all about moving forward.
Yeah. Dean, you have 4 basic things that you mentioned that got you through this. Can you share with them? Can you share the 4 basic items?
Yeah. I think the psychologist told me that I had these. He says, you have a very loving family and very supportive family. You have a strong faith. You have a strong cadre of friends, both all the way around you. And then you have, the last is communities. You have your community that you grew up with as a kid and in your church and your local community. And you also have the Kent State community, not necessarily the administration, but the professors and the staff who regularly visited me in the hospital. So I had all this support and all this love, and to sustain me through the hard days of rehabilitation and hard days of dealing with the medical complications that I had as my body changed from being an athlete and a strong, healthy man to becoming a spinal cord injured person.
Yeah.
There is a body transition there. Your organs all have to learn how to function a little bit differently.
Well, I just want to say that all of a sudden that transformation began. You're athletic. Now you're in a wheelchair Olympics, and you sailed through rehab and turned Kent after missing in just a quarter. But after that, how about you were a county commissioner in Athens County? You became a social studies teacher too, and oh my goodness, you discussed it with the students. And so, talk. What was it like as a county commissioner in Athens County?
Well, as you know, Athens County is located in southeast Ohio.
Right, yes.
But prior to that, I'd worked for Attorney General Anthony J. Celebrezzi when he was the Attorney General, also when he was the Secretary of State. And one of the jobs I had was to make the boards of elections wheelchair accessible, and also polling places in the state of Ohio. And so, when I started showing up at courthouses, and a lot of them were not accessible, I would meet with the commissioners and various public officials outside on the sidewalk. And it didn't take long before they realized they had to make their facilities wheelchair accessible. And so that laid the groundwork. So when I became a county commissioner, the Athens County always has been the courthouse wheelchair accessible. They have ground level entrance, and then they have an elevator that goes down to the ground. And it had total access at that point in time. There were some things they had to adjust with restrooms and doorways along the way, but those were minor things to do. But Athens County is very hilly as well too. So I attribute my athletic prowess to the ability to survive in such a hilly, rugged terrain. Just because I was very fit, and very strong, and very adventurous at the same time as well. And I heard some rumblings along the way when I was campaigning, my 3 campaigns. There was sort of like a whisper campaign that, he's one of those communist radical hippies from North Ohio.
Oh, wow. Oh.
And so my comeback to that was, well, I wouldn't be working for the Attorney General of the state of Ohio if I were such a terrible person.
Yeah.
You have questions, ask them to me directly. And I confronted it head on. I didn't hide from it, and I talked to them about all the things that I had done in my life and how I grew up. So people knew who I was. They knew I was a person of faith. They knew I was not some crazy person. And I was elected twice.
That's great.
And I lost the third election by, I think it was 46 votes. That's what the election was. So.
Dean, we just the time we do have left here, I want to talk about your wheelchair, your athletics and wheelchair marathons, and working out. So, how's it going for you with that?
Well, right now I'm sort of in a holding pattern because I fell and hurt myself a couple of years ago, and I've had some unexplained complications. Even the doctor can't figure out. I've had bone infections and blood infections and problems with the wound as it was healing, and then I had to have some surgery to fix some damage that they discovered that was there. So I've had a lot of setbacks, but I'm doing well. Every time I crawl, I have a prone cart, Prone. So I lay on my stomach and wheel around my house. And,
okay. Yeah.
So I do, every time I get into my cart, I do 20 push-ups. And that's
Wow.
3 times a day. So over the course of the day, I'm doing anywhere from 40 to 60 push-ups a day. And I have a couple of dumbbells that I swing around and use. So once I get back sitting up and I'm allowed to start training again, I'll start into a training program. And hopefully I'll be able to get back to running 5Ks, 10Ks, half marathons. And I have one more marathon to run in my lifetime, and I'll be training for that eventually.
Oh,
and so, I may not be as active in the first year or two after I start sitting up, But by the third year, I hope to be able to run that marathon when I'm 73.
This is an amazing story, Dean, for you to take time to share this with us this morning on this day today. And as a body, how can we pray for you, Dean, and to give you encouragement?
Well, just encourage me or pray for me to find the strength that I know God has given me, and to use my talent for as good as possible as God has instructed us to do. And I also pray for the National Guardsmen as well. And I would hope that your listeners would do the same.
Dean, also, just to remind, boy, this would be a great book. You know, you ever thought about writing a book, maybe a movie out of it? I don't think it'd be a great book, though. I really would.
Well, I'm really not a writer. I've tried writing.
Mm-hmm.
If I do a book, I'm going to have a ghostwriter.
Yeah.
At that point in time.
Maybe it's something that you can pray about and let the Lord lead you. Dean Kaler, it's the 50th anniversary of the Kent State shootings on campus. And Dean, I really appreciate you giving us some of your time today, and we'll keep you in our prayer. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, you're welcome, and I wish your listeners well at the same time.
All right, thanks again for joining us. Jim Bernay in for Susie Thomas, special edition of Our Community on the Light 95.9.